Clara stood at the edge of her driveway, the key to her new home clutched tightly in her hand. The soft hum of her son Daniel's car faded into the distance, leaving behind an unfamiliar stillness. She took a deep breath, trying to summon the courage to step inside the house he had so generously gifted her. At 65, Clara had hoped for a peaceful, settled life, but here she was, beginning again. The house was charming, a quaint, single-story building with white shutters and a neatly trimmed front lawn. Yet, as she pushed the door open and stepped into the empty living room, the silence felt overwhelming. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the bare walls and wooden floors. Boxes labeled kitchen, bedroom, and living room were stacked in neat piles, waiting to be unpacked. Clara ran her hand over the countertop in the kitchen, imagining the warmth of home-cooked meals and the laughter of family filling the space. But those were distant dreams for now. In truth, this move was a necessity, not a choice. Her years living with Lucas, her younger son, had been a test of patience and endurance. His reckless lifestyle, constant arguments with his girlfriend, and the parade of strangers in and out of the house had drained her both physically and emotionally. Daniel, ever the protector, had seen her wariness and intervened. "Mom, you deserve better," he'd insisted. "This house is close to us. You'll have peace here." While Clara was grateful for his thoughtfulness, she couldn't shake the lingering sense of loss. Her life had been uprooted, and now she was left to piece it together in this quiet, unfamiliar neighborhood. As she began unpacking her belongings, Clara's thoughts wandered back to Lucas. She wondered how he was managing without her. The love of a mother was complex. Even when hurt, it remained steadfast. But for now, she had to focus on herself. The house was a blank canvas, and she resolved to turn it into a sanctuary, even if the silence felt heavier than she expected. The following afternoon, Clara was on her knees scrubbing the fireplace when a loud knock on the door startled her. She wiped her hands on her apron, heart racing. Visitors were the last thing she expected in this quiet neighborhood. When she opened the door, her breath hitched. A young boy, no older than 12, stood trembling on the doorstep. His face was streaked with dirt and tears, and he clutched a battered shoebox to his chest. "Please, ma'am," he stammered, his voice cracking with fear. "You have to help me. My mom, she's dying." Clara's initial reaction was confusion. She scanned the street, hoping to spot someone who might explain the boy's sudden appearance, but the road was empty. Her heart ached at the sight of his tear-streaked face, yet a part of her hesitated. Was this some kind of prank? A trap? "What's your name, sweetheart?" she asked gently, crouching to his level. "Jamie," he whispered, his small hands gripping the shoebox tighter. "Jamie, where's your mother?" Clara probed, her voice steady despite the unease creeping into her chest. He pointed toward the house across the street, his movements frantic. "She's in there. She's hurt bad. Please, you have to come." Clara's instincts told her to comfort the boy, but the fear in his eyes stopped her short. There was something else at play, something she didn't yet understand. "Let me call for help," she offered, reaching for her phone. "No," Jamie cried, stepping back. "You can't call anyone. Just hide this, please." He shoved the shoebox toward her, his hands trembling. Before Clara could respond, Jamie turned and bolted down the street, leaving her frozen in the doorway. She stood there for a long moment, clutching the shoebox, her mind racing with questions. What could have driven a boy so young to such desperation? Clara closed the door, her hands trembling as she placed the shoebox on the kitchen table. The boy's urgency and fear had shaken her. She stared at the box, debating whether to open it, but something about the situation felt wrong. Instead, she moved to the window and peered outside, scanning the street for any sign of Jamie. Her eyes fell on the house across the street, the one Jamie had pointed to. It looked ordinary enough, with its neatly trimmed hedges and a freshly painted facade. But as Clara stood watching, she noticed something peculiar. The curtains on the second-floor window moved ever so slightly, as if someone was watching her. Clara's breath caught. She shook her head, trying to dismiss her unease. Maybe it was just her imagination, or maybe Jamie's frantic story had made her overly suspicious. Just as she turned away from the window, a faint sound reached her ears. It was muffled, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a soft, high-pitched cry. Clara froze, straining to hear. The noise seemed to be coming from the house across the street. Compelled by a mix of curiosity and concern, Clara stepped outside and crossed the road. She approached the house cautiously, glancing over her shoulder to make sure no one was watching. When she reached the front door, she hesitated. Knocking felt intrusive, but the sound of crying persisted, tugging at her conscience. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling slightly. "Is anyone home?" No response. The house remained eerily silent. Clara's heart pounded as she tried the door, but it was locked. Frustrated and uneasy, she retreated to her own home, her mind racing. Something was wrong, she was sure of it. Back inside, the shoebox sat untouched on the table. Clara sat down beside it, running her fingers along its worn edges. Whatever secrets it held, they seemed to hold the key to understanding Jamie's plea for help. But as much as she wanted answers, she couldn't shake the feeling that opening it might lead to something far darker than she was prepared for. The next evening, Clara sat by the window, sipping tea, her mind still lingering on the strange events of the previous day. The shoebox remained on her kitchen table, unopened, like a silent witness to the mystery. She hadn't seen Jamie again and began wondering if she had imagined the entire encounter. Just as she was about to dismiss the thought entirely, the doorbell rang. The sound was sharp and urgent, cutting through the quiet evening. Clara's heart leaped as she hurried to the door, and there he was, Jamie. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear, but this time the shoebox was nowhere to be seen. "Please, ma'am, you have to help," he begged, his voice shaking. "They're going to hurt her." Clara knelt, trying to steady him. "Jamie, slow down. Who's going to hurt who?" "My sister," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "She's just a baby. Please, you're the only one who can help us." Clara's mind raced. The desperation in Jamie's voice was undeniable. "Where is she?" "Is she in the house across the street?" Jamie nodded frantically, but didn't say more. Instead, he shoved a crumpled piece of paper into her hands. Before Clara could unfold it, Jamie suddenly turned and bolted down the street again, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as he had come. Clara called after him, but he didn't look back. She stepped back inside, her hands trembling as she smoothed out the paper. It was a hastily scribbled note in childish handwriting. "Don't trust him. Hide the box, please." Her pulse quickened as the note confirmed her fears. There was more to this than she'd initially thought. Clara's unease grew heavier with each passing moment. She paced the living room, debating what to do. She couldn't just ignore the boy's plea, but interfering could bring trouble in a neighborhood she barely knew. Before she could decide, another knock on the door startled her. She opened it cautiously, only to find no one outside. But when she looked down, the shoebox was back, sitting on her doorstep. Clara brought the shoebox inside, her hands trembling. The weight of the mystery pressed heavily on her. She stared at the box, her resolve wavering, when her phone buzzed. It was Daniel calling. "Mom, how are you settling in?" he asked warmly. Clara hesitated, considering whether to tell him about Jamie and the strange events. Finally, she said, "Daniel, there's something odd going on here. A boy, Jamie, keeps coming to me for help. He says his sister is in danger." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Daniel spoke. "Mom, don't get involved. This isn't your responsibility, and you don't know these people. Just focus on settling in, okay?" His words offered little comfort. As they spoke, Clara's gaze drifted toward the house across the street. A shadow moved behind the curtain, and her grip on the phone tightened. "I'll be fine," she murmured, more to reassure herself than Daniel. As the call ended, Clara jumped at the sound of heavy footsteps on her porch. A man was standing at her door, his silhouette menacing under the porch light. He knocked once, firm, deliberate, and Clara's stomach turned. Opening the door slightly, she came face to face with a tall man in his late 30s, his expression cold and calculating. "Evening," he said, his voice clipped. "Name's Kyle. I think you've met my boy, Jamie." Clara's heart pounded. "Yes, he came by earlier. Is everything okay?" Kyle's eyes narrowed, his gaze drifting past Clara and into the house. "He's been acting out lately. Got a lot of wild ideas in his head. Don't pay him no mind." Clara felt a chill run down her spine. Something about Kyle's demeanor didn't sit right. His tone was too controlled, too dismissive. He seemed very upset, she ventured cautiously. Kyle's expression hardened. "He's got issues. Autism, you know. Makes up stories sometimes. I just wanted to let you know there's nothing to worry about." Before Clara could respond, Kyle stepped closer, his towering frame casting a shadow over her. "Oh, and one more thing," he added, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "If he comes here again, send him back. Don't meddle in things that don't concern you." He gave her a pointed look before walking away, his heavy boots echoing down the porch steps. Clara closed the door, locking it firmly behind her. Her hands shook as she leaned against the door, her mind racing. Kyle's words hadn't eased her worries. They'd only confirmed them. Something was terribly wrong in that house. The next morning, Clara sat at her kitchen table, staring at the shoebox and the note Jamie had left. Every instinct told her she couldn't ignore this. The boy's fear was real, and Kyle's hostility only deepened her suspicions. But what could she do? Calling the police felt extreme, especially without knowing the full story. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the porch. Clara's breath caught as the doorbell rang. Peering through the peephole, she was surprised to see Kyle standing there again, but this time he wasn't alone. Behind him was a man Clara hadn't seen before, dressed in a crisp button-down shirt and carrying a leather briefcase. His demeanor was calm but authoritative, his presence unsettling in its own way. Clara opened the door cautiously. "Good morning, ma'am," the man said, flashing a practiced smile. "I'm Corey, a friend of Kyle's. I'm here to clear up any misunderstandings about the situation with Jamie." Kyle stood silently, his arms crossed, his eyes drilling into Clara. Corey continued. "Jamie has a vivid imagination. He's a sweet kid, but struggles with reality sometimes. Kyle asked me to explain since he knows you're new here and might be confused." Clara's instincts flared. Something about Corey's overly polite tone felt rehearsed. She glanced at Kyle, whose expression remained cold and unyielding. "I appreciate the explanation," Clara said carefully, "but I'm not sure I understand what's going on." Kyle stepped forward, his voice low and threatening. "What's going on is you're sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. I'm telling you for the last time, stay out of it." Corey raised a hand, as if to calm Kyle, but the tension between them was palpable. Clara felt trapped, unsure of how to respond. As they left, Kyle shot her one final glare. "Don't make me come back here," he warned before disappearing down the street with Corey. Clara locked the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. She couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out for Jamie and his sister, and that she might be their only hope. Clara spent the rest of the day pacing her small living room, torn between fear and a growing sense of responsibility. Jamie's cries for help replayed in her mind, as did Kyle's menacing warning. Every glance at the shoebox on her table filled her with dread. What could be inside that was so important? As the sun dipped below the horizon, Clara noticed movement across the street. Through the narrow gap in the curtains of Kyle's house, she saw Jamie's small figure, his face pressed against the glass. His eyes looked hollow, pleading silently across the darkening street. A pang of guilt stabbed at Clara. She had promised to help him, but so far she had done nothing. Moments later, the curtain snapped shut, and Clara's heart sank. Seconds later, the door to Kyle's house slammed open, and she saw him storm out. He was carrying a baseball bat, his heavy strides directed straight toward her home. Clara froze. Her hands trembled as she grabbed her phone and dialed Daniel. He answered on the second ring. "Mom, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with concern. "Daniel, he's coming," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Kyle's coming here? He has a bat." "Lock the door," Daniel said firmly. "Don't answer it. Call the police if you need to." Before Clara could respond, there was a loud pounding at her door. Kyle's voice boomed, muffled but unmistakably angry. "Clara, open this door now." Clara's heart raced as she bolted the deadlock and pressed her back against the door. "Daniel, Mom, stay calm," Daniel interrupted. "I'm on my way." Outside, Kyle's voice grew louder and more aggressive. "You think you're smart, huh? Meddling in things you don't understand? Open this door before I break it down." Clara's panic peaked as she glanced toward the kitchen. Jamie had said to hide the shoebox, but where? She grabbed it and shoved it into the cupboard beneath the sink, just as another loud bang shook the door. Her trembling fingers hovered over her phone, debating whether to call the police. But what if doing so made things worse? The sound of sirens pierced the night, their wailing growing louder with every second. Clara exhaled a shaky breath of relief as Kyle's pounding abruptly stopped. She peeked through the window and saw the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the houses on her street. 2 police cars screeched to a halt in front of her home, and officers emerged, their hands on their holsters. Kyle stepped back from Clara's door, his bat hanging loosely at his side. His face twisted into a sneer as he raised his hands mockingly. "What? You call the cops on me, lady?" he shouted. The officers approached him cautiously, one of them speaking firmly. "Sir, drop the bat and step away from the property." Kyle hesitated, his jaw tightening. Then, with a defiant shrug, he let the bat fall to the ground. "I wasn't going to do anything, just having a chat with the new neighbor." Clara opened the door slightly, her voice shaking as she addressed the officers. "He threatened me. He's been harassing me since yesterday." As the officers questioned Kyle, Clara caught sight of movement across the street. Jamie was standing on the porch of his house, clutching the frame of the doorway. Next to him was a tiny figure, a little girl, no more than 3 years old, her wide eyes reflecting the blue glow of the police lights. Clara's heart sank. She realized the girl must be Jamie's sister, the one he had begged her to save. The officers finished speaking to Kyle, who returned to his house with a menacing glare thrown over his shoulder. One of the officers approached Clara. "Ma'am, are you all right? Do you want to file a report?" Clara hesitated. Filing a report might escalate things, but staying silent could leave Jamie and his sister in further danger. Before she could answer, a loud cry rang out from across the street. Everyone turned toward Kyle's house. Jamie was shouting, his voice filled with desperation. "No! Leave her alone!" The officers immediately turned their attention to the commotion, moving swiftly toward the house. Clara stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat. The little girl was crying now, her wails echoing in the still night. The officers knocked on Kyle's door, their voices firm. "Sir, open up. We need to speak with you." For a moment, there was no response. Then, Kyle appeared in the doorway, blocking the entrance with his broad frame. "What now?" he asked, his tone sharp. "Step aside, sir. We need to ensure everyone in the house is safe," one of the officers said. Kyle scoffed. "Safe? You think I'm some kind of monster? Go ahead, look around. You won't find anything." The officers didn't wait for his permission. They pushed past him, and Clara watched from her window, her heart pounding. She prayed they would find Jamie and his sister before it was too late. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Then the front door of Kyle's house opened, and an officer emerged carrying the little girl. Her tiny arms were wrapped tightly around his neck, her sobs muffled against his shoulder. Behind them, another officer led Jamie out, his face pale but determined. Kyle was handcuffed and escorted to one of the police cars. He shouted obscenities, his voice hoarse with rage. "You don't understand! They're my kids! I didn't do anything wrong." The officers ignored him, their focus on getting the children to safety. Clara stepped outside, unable to stay behind any longer. One of the officers approached her, holding the shoebox she had hidden under her sink. "Ma'am, Jamie told us about this. Can you confirm it belongs to him?" Clara nodded, her voice catching in her throat. "Yes, he gave it to me. I didn't open it, but he said it was important." The officer opened the box carefully, revealing a collection of photos and documents. Clara caught glimpses of bruises, injuries, and written complaints, evidence of years of abuse. Her stomach churned as the horrifying reality sank in. Jamie turned to Clara, his voice trembling. "Thank you," he said softly, "for believing me." Clara knelt and pulled him into a gentle hug, her heart breaking for the pain he had endured. "You're safe now," she whispered. "You and your sister are safe." For the first time since Jamie had appeared on her doorstep, Clara felt a sense of purpose. She had been right to trust her instincts, and now these children had a chance at a better life. The next morning, Clara sat at her kitchen table, sipping a cup of tea as the sun cast a warm glow across her modest home. The events of the previous night felt like a blur, a storm that had upended her quiet new life. Yet, as she gazed out the window, watching the gentle swaying of the trees, she felt something she hadn't in a long time, a sense of clarity. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of tires crunching on gravel. Peering outside, she saw Daniel's car pulling into the driveway. He stepped out, his face lined with worry, and entered the house quickly. "Mom," he said, embracing her tightly. "Are you all right? I couldn't stop thinking about what happened." Clara nodded, her voice calm but resolute. "I'm okay, Daniel. The children, They're the ones who need help. Daniel sighed and sat down at the table, rubbing his temples. I spoke to the officers. The boy, Jamie, and his sister, Emily, are in protective custody now. They've been through so much, Mom. And Kyle, he won't see the outside of a jail cell for a long time after all the evidence they found. Clara looked down at her hands, her mind turning over an idea that had taken root during the night. Daniel, she said carefully, I've been thinking. Those children have no one. They need a stable home, a place where they can feel safe and loved. What if? She hesitated, searching for the right words. What if I offered to foster them? Daniel blinked, caught off guard. Mom, are you sure about this? You've been through a lot lately. Taking on 2 kids, especially after everything that's happened. I'm sure, Clara said firmly. For years, I've felt like something was missing. Moving here, starting fresh, it was supposed to fill that void, but it didn't. Meeting Jamie and Emily showed me what I've been searching for. I want to give them the love and security they've been denied. And I'm not alone in this. I'll have your support, won't I? Daniel's expression softened, and a small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. Of course, Mom. If anyone can give those kids a second chance at life, it's you. That afternoon, Clara visited the hospital where Jamie and Emily were being cared for. The social worker overseeing their case greeted her warmly, expressing gratitude for Clara's willingness to step forward. When Clara entered the room, Jamie was sitting on a chair by the window, his arms protectively wrapped around Emily, who was nestled in his lap. Both looked up at her with wide, uncertain eyes. Clara's heart swelled with affection and determination. She knelt down to their level, her voice soft and reassuring. Hi, Jamie. Hi, Emily. I know you've been through so much, but I want you to know you're not alone anymore. If you're okay with it, I'd love for you both to come live with me. I'll do everything I can to make sure you feel safe and happy. Jamie's eyes welled with tears, but he didn't look away. Instead, he nodded, his grip on Emily tightening. You mean it? He whispered. We can stay with you? Clara smiled, tears brimming in her own eyes. I mean it. You're part of my family now. Emily, too young to fully understand, mimicked her brother's nod and reached out her tiny hand. Clara took it gently, feeling the warmth of her promise to them both. In the weeks that followed, Clara's home transformed. The once empty guest rooms became Jamie and Emily's sanctuary, filled with cozy beds, bright colors, and shelves of books and toys. Laughter echoed through the halls, replacing the silence that had once felt so oppressive. Clara rediscovered a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Jamie, initially wary and reserved, began to open up, sharing stories of his love for drawing and his dreams of becoming an artist. Emily, ever curious and energetic, brought a playful spirit to the household, her giggles lighting up even the gloomiest days. Daniel visited often, bringing gifts and spending time with the children. He marveled at the transformation in his mother, who seemed more vibrant and fulfilled than ever. One evening, as Clara tucked Emily into bed and kissed her forehead, Jamie approached her with a sketch pad in hand. He shyly handed it to her, and Clara opened it to find a drawing of the 3 of them. Jamie, Emily, and Clara, standing together in front of her house, smiling. Thank you, Jamie said softly, his voice filled with gratitude, for everything. Clara pulled him into a gentle hug, her voice steady but emotional. You've given me as much as I've given you, Jamie. We're a family now, and family takes care of each other. As Clara lay in bed that night, she reflected on how much her life had changed. The loneliness she had once feared would consume her was gone, replaced by love and purpose. Jamie and Emily had brought light into her home, and in turn, she had given them the stability they desperately needed. Her new beginning had taken an unexpected path, but it was one she wouldn't trade for anything. As she drifted off to sleep, Clara felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that she, and the children she now called her own, had finally found the family they had all been searching for. Months passed, and the seasons shifted from the crisp chill of autumn to the gentle warmth of spring. Clara's house, once quiet and subdued, now brimmed with life. The walls were adorned with Jamie's colorful drawings, each one capturing a moment of their growing family. Emily's laughter rang out as she toddled through the garden, chasing butterflies under the watchful eye of her older brother. Clara often marveled at how much had changed since that fateful evening when Jamie first knocked on her door. She had started this chapter of her life seeking solitude and healing, but instead, she had found something far greater: a purpose, a family, and a love that filled her heart in ways she never imagined possible. Though the shadows of the past still lingered in Jamie's quiet moments or Emily's restless nights, they were no longer bound by them. Together, they faced each day with courage and hope. Clara's once empty house had become a home, not just for the children, but for her as well. One evening, as they all sat together on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Jamie turned to Clara with a question that caught her by surprise. "Do you think we're going to be okay?" he asked, his voice tentative. Clara smiled and wrapped an arm around his shoulders, pulling him close. "We already are, Jamie," she said softly. "We're together, and that's what makes us okay." Emily climbed onto Clara's lap, giggling as she pointed to the stars beginning to twinkle in the sky. Clara kissed her forehead, feeling a profound sense of gratitude for the second chance they had all been given. This was more than a new beginning. It was a home built on love, resilience, and the unshakable bond of family. And as they sat there, basking in the glow of the setting sun, Clara knew that they would face whatever came next, together. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the full story and watch the video. I hope you enjoyed this journey of love, resilience, and second chances as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. If you found the story moving, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Your support means the world to me and helps me bring more stories to life. Stay tuned for more. And until next time, take care.